blood from coming up directly.
Oh, you got gavelled.
It is 7 PM. The on-light is on, and I'll call the Londonderry Planning Board meeting to order for January 12th, 2022. I just want to point out for the vast audience that is here and the board, you hear this before, is that there are two exits to this room. They're on the right-hand side of the audience, the front of the room and the back of the room. We need to evacuate for any reason. We ask you to proceed through the exit closest to you. Go outside, move away from the building, and don't come back into. Our fire officials have instructed everyone to do so. And that's regardless of the weather. If it's raining, you go out. If it's cold, you go out. So. And I'd like to ask everyone to please rise with pledge allegiance to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everyone. First part of the meeting tonight is administrative board work, where we get our business done. We have no new plans, no conceptual plans. And tonight we're going to be just discussing our zoning amendments in a workshop session. And what I'll do is start with administrative board work. We have no minutes to approve. Do we have any regional impact determinations, Colleen?
No regional impact determinations this evening.
Okay, discussions with town staff.
I don't have anything.
Everything's fine. Board have anything? If not, hope everyone was at least protected from the weather yesterday. It's been brutal. I think it's been at least 3 years since I've had anything like that, so we kind of got spoiled. Okay, we'll move right to our zoning amendment workshop. This is this discussion with the planning board. And Nick Codner is here, our code enforcement official, to assist in the discussion. And what we'll be doing is discussing portable storage structures in the AR1 district. Also, we're going to talk about commercial kennels, and then about livestock, and especially relating to poultry. Groundwater protection ordinance, potential ordinance, and then some housekeeping issues that Colleen has. So we'll start off with talk about portable storage structures, and I think, Nick, you can, well, you actually can come down front here if you want, and get yourself comfy.
Okay, you guys have all read this already, I take it, or would you like me to read it?
Well, yes, probably for the public, so they know what's going on that's listening, so. And it'll give us a nice summary also.
Okay. As presently written, 5.15.7 states, the zoning board of administration may impose additional conditions such as appropriate screening, landscaping, fencing, or other requirements that it deems necessary to protect the character of the neighborhood. Although 5.15.1.7 states that the zoning board of adjustment may impose additional conditions, nowhere in the ordinance is the length of time of a portable storage structure may remain on the property specifically dealt with. If a special exception for a portable storage structure is granted without any discussion of the length of time it will remain on the property, the container becomes permanent. Because a permanent storage container does carry the potential to affect the character of the neighborhood and neighbor property values, I propose adding a 16th question to the application for a special exception, L20 5.15.1. The application for special exception, L20 5.15.1, should be amended to add a 16th question. How long will the portable storage structure remain on the property? And amend the ordinance 5.15.1 to add an 8th criteria. 8, the applicant shall state what length of time a portable structure will remain on the property. The zoning board of adjustment may approve or limit the length of time a portable storage structure may remain on the property. As stated, and I brought this forward because after a couple of different ZBA meetings, Neil Dunn had brought it up and asked, said, shouldn't we look at this again, because the length of time wasn't even brought up. And so if a special exception is granted, that container could be there 50 years if the people remain on that property. And if it is, they have to get the special exception from the ZBA, and the neighbors will be notified, but a lot of neighbors are reluctant to come and oppose something because they don't want to offend their neighbors. And they may be opposed to it, and it could change the character of the neighborhood, but they're reluctant to come forward. And I think it's our job to protect the people of the town and not put them in a position where they would have to do that. So it should at least be something that's dealt with before the board, before they grant a special exception.
I know when the board was discussing this with staff, this is a number of years ago now, we did debate that, and I think the general consensus is to leave it open for the ZBA when to ask the questions and to make that decision. But, I mean, it doesn't sound like that's happening. And,
No, and
I
it's,
think what you have is, well, to me, as just one voting member of the board, it's very reasonable. But what I'll do is get our staff input, and I'll go through the board also for input on it, too.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, to echo what Nick said, I think that the ZBA has struggled a little bit with some of the applications. We know that this is fairly recently adopted, allowing these by a special exception. In the language right now, I think there's an argument to be made that they already have the authority to limit the time frame. They can impose whatever conditions they want. But I think that, writing this out explicitly, gives the ZBA some level of comfort that they have the authority to limit the time of this. And I think the amendment to the application just makes sense so that it's clear that the applicant is telling them how long they want it for. So I don't think that this really changes anything. I think it just clarifies it and makes the ZBA's job a little bit easier.
Yeah. If we had our hindsight, we probably would have been a little more thorough. But you have to let us know. And you're the one that has to, enforce it, so you, right on the front line there. So. Deb?
I do think this is a good idea. And, with turnover on the ZBA, not everybody knows what they can and cannot do or what questions they should or should not ask. Because if it is there for an indefinite period of time, like you said, for 50 years, right?
Yeah.
They don't pay taxes on that. So if they had built a shed, which would be doing the same thing, they would be getting assessed and taxed on it. So they could get a used storage unit on Craigslist or Marketplace, maybe $1,000, and leave it there indefinitely and never have to pay taxes on it. So I think by doing this, kind of alleviates that little loophole for people who are maybe skirting things. So I do think that that's a good idea.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think having that question there guides the applicant appropriately. What happens if the applicant does say unknown, or I have no idea, or
Well, then the
something along
board
those
can,
lines? What's
the board can address it with them to draw it out. Well, what do you think? And they'll go back and forth until they come up with some kind of an answer.
Okay. Yeah, that was really just my only question there.
Okay, Lynn?
So I guess my first question is, why don't we just impose a maximum time in the ordinance as opposed to doing something else and then asking the applicant to come back after a period of time, or allowing the ZBA to deviate from what that maximum amount of time is?
Yeah.
I worry about allowing them to say, 6 months or a year, 2 years,
Yeah.
It sets a precedent, and then, if somebody gets it for 2 years, how come you gave it to me for 6 months?
The ordinance previously had set maximums, and the recent amendment was done because there was some pushback from folks who felt that we were being overly restrictive on that. So that was actually something that was amended as a result, and the board members who were here at the time probably recall an agonizing 18 months of ongoing discussion about portable storage.
Yep.
So there was a lot of back and forth about that. And ultimately, the elimination of the restriction was the whole thing that prompted amending, and which is how we came down to settle with them being permitted by special exception rather than, prohibited or requiring a variance or other. So it was sort of a balancing act. And so not any real good answer, but I think that it was sort of determined, and when the board had left it in the hands of the ZBA, was intentionally to be kind of broad and to let the ZBA use their judgment to determine what's appropriate on a case-by-case basis. If you have 50 acres and it's not visible from anywhere and, then you may be able to keep it for longer or a different period of time or with different restrictions than if you're on a smaller lot where it's a more visible situation.
So we're giving no guidance really to the applicant by making this language change. We're making them guess what they can get away with, basically. That's my concern with the way it's written today. And things change, the character of a neighborhood changes over time as well. And I think having the applicant come back in periodically to have their position re-reviewed, so to speak, is a good thing as well.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, if a person has a container today, this new regulation won't apply to them, right? Everything that's out there today will be grandfathered in.
If they've already received a special exception, if they've already.
I know there's a few containers down in our neighborhood that have been there for 20 years, right?
They're,
In an AR1 area. I'm not going to say addresses because I don't want to go down that path, right? But
there are containers that seem to grow out of nowhere, that we say, wow, I never noticed that before, and the leaves come off the trees.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
They've just been there. It doesn't mean they were legal, but they've been there.
Yep.
And we usually deal with them when we find them.
So that still doesn't give you any more legs to go off and take an enforcement action to somebody that's had a container on their property for 10 years and they never went through the proper channels to get it approved.
Yeah, we do. So long as they
Does
were
this
there,
allow us to do that?
yeah, if they
way it's
put
written?
them there after the town put zoning in against having the containers without a permit, if they're not legal and they don't have a special exception, then yeah, we tell them they have to either get a special exception or remove it.
I think I remember some of the discussions on it and how we varied with the amount of time. It seemed to be 6 months or a year. And then, I think there was an individual that was here, in fact, he had sold containers or rented containers or whatever, and he thought people should have them, period. So we didn't agree with that. And I think there's 2 meetings with the town council also, because it being an ordinance change, we make the recommendation to the town council. The town council does it. I think they had 2 hearings on it. And, I think it was more of just a few individuals that felt that we should just allow it. And then there was some that definitely residential, area, residential neighborhood, you got to put some controls on it.
Well, they are a commercial structure. They're not,
Yes.
they're built to go on container ships. It's not, they weren't built to be in a neighborhood,
Yeah.
keeping a
what-
lawnmower in
I think what we put in, and was try to hide it as much as possible. 'Cause I know one of the churches had one, and they had like 50 acres of land, it was way out back, no one even knew it was there, but it was there, and they said, no one knows that it's there, why should I be penalized on it? So, there are varying opinions, and we have the weighing act to do, or ultimately to the town council.
And, I looked at the ordinance today, and if you're looking at commercial property, we limit the time a container can be on a piece of commercial property without getting a site plan adjustment, right, to six months. And I still think, I like the idea of having that finite time defined, or else at least giving some guidance to the ZBA. I don't know if they want to just still have carte blanche to say, yeah, we think 2 years is okay in this application and 6 months is okay in another application, if that's what they want, if they want to have that. I'm sure they want the flexibility until the time that it comes back to bite them a little bit.
The reason why I think they should have this in here is because in the ordinance, they speak about other conditions, about the site and about property values, but they don't specifically bring up time.
Yeah.
And so even after the ZBA meetings are all done, and they'll be saying, gee, how come they, we're not we're just letting them have it, and there's no limit, and it's like, well, you guys have the power to do that, but they're unaware of it, so this way it's right front and center.
And I think asking the question is the right thing to do, given the way the ordinance is written today.
Yeah.
I just, I guess what I'm saying is I think the way the ordinance is written today, I would love to see some more
Yeah.
clarity around it.
I think that one of the major points of contention when we amended this was that previously there was the restriction on, that set, and I believe it was 12 months at that point, and
That's my recollection.
And that was the public comment and a couple of individuals that were very vocal during the public comment period was that there should not be a time frame restriction on it. So at one point, there were drafts that eliminated the time frame, but they were permitted by variance. It was determined then, and through discussion with Attorney Ramsdell, that perhaps a variance was not the right procedure and a special exception. I suspect that if we put a time limitation back in again, whether it be 12 months or 24 months, with a hard definition, I suspect that we'll get the public comment again that kind of drove it the last time. So I'm definitely open to putting a restriction in there, but I think that we'll probably get some pushback from the individuals that raised the amendment the first time around a couple of years ago.
Okay, so I guess my final comment is I agree with asking the question the way the ordinance is written today. I just think the ordinance, the way it's written today, needs a little bit of redefinition. Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Johnny?
So I kind of get it. So the intent of not setting a time frame is somebody comes to you, Nick, and says, look, my house just burnt down. It's going to take me 18 months to,
We have a provision in there anyway, that if you have a construction permit, then you're allowed to have a container until 14 days after you get your CO. So they would automatically have a container.
oh, okay. All right. So, and the portable, that's defined in what it is? I mean, is it-
Portable storage structure.
yeah. So is it like, you know, those little pop-up Quonset hunt type things? Are they
No.
considered?
No,
they're
those are
just the-
membrane structures. We don't regulate those because we consider those to be temporary, and Mother Nature makes sure that they are. They usually, after one winter, they're gone.
And then my question, I think, was asked down here, but I don't know if I got, so like anybody that's currently using one, do they receive some sort of grandfathered status? Or as you go and find them, do you say, hey, you need to go and,
Well, it depends on how long it's been there and if they're there legally. If they have if they came before you and already got, or before the ZBA and got the special exception, then no, they wouldn't be. And this isn't putting a time limit on it. This just is amending the application so that it'll be before the ZBA that, hey, we should ask this question. It's up to the ZBA on a case-by-case basis to decide between them and the applicant how long it'll be there. So we're not placing a time limit.
no, I understand that. I was just wondering what the, you know, why, how do you define between 2 months and, I guess I'm just trying to say, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what is a qualifying reason for any length of time?
I've seen a couple of cases where the applicant had come in and they were asked, well, why do you want to have that container? Well, I moved in and I have all my furniture from my last house and my house is already furnished. So I'd like to have it for 6 months while I go through the stuff, decide what I want to keep. And so the board said, oh, you want it for 6 months? And he said, well, yeah. And they said, why don't we give it to you for a year? And they said, okay, you got it for a year on that instance. And then there's other ones where they don't even mention the time. They just say, we want to have this storage container. And they kind of look at each other, scratch their heads and say, well, okay. They give it to them and the time isn't even brought up. So they don't even ask. So at least it would be out there to ask the resident, you know, how long do you intend on having this? So, you know, if they say, I don't know, 10 years, I want to be here 30 years. Or if I want it for 5 years, at least ask the question.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the ZBA to decide if it's reasonable.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just to build on that a little bit. So would we expect the ZBA to put in the time limit that they determine in their determination in their response?
Yes, it
So
would be
if,
a condition in their
If
decision.
somebody came asking for 2 years, that would be part of the
Yep, that would be
condition.
part of the conditions of approval.
And another reason may be that if this is asked in every instance, and there are neighbors who might say, you know, I don't like his yard the way it looks already. I think he's affecting my property value. And he gives an argument enough where, you know, I really do need this. Well, then there could be a reasonable determination made where, well, okay. It's, the neighbors, we're gonna just kind of, will placate you by allowing him to have it for, say, 5 years if he says, I need it to accomplish this, and then be gone. So at least it gives them something else to work with. And it just brings it up.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Jason?
I think short-term and temporary, like this is better than what we've got now. And just piggybacking on what you said, you know, it could also be with the neighbors, you know, think somebody's applying for a storage unit for a month, and then when the thing comes up, they realize they want it for 5 years, you know?
Well, if there's no time limit on it, if
Yeah,
it's not
exactly, yeah.
voluntarily spoken, it's there for as long as they live there.
Yeah, I mean, I've got somebody who lives around me who literally landscapes around their storage unit. Like,
Yeah.
it's become a part of their house.
Yeah.
Now, but I would like to see, like Lynn says, us say, okay, you know, I mean, in a residential setting, especially if you already have the construction waiver, you know, you've got 2 years to, you know, figure out a permanent solution for what you need, or, you know, some kind of a limit that takes the onus off of the ZBA. But for right now, I think this is a better solution. What happens if they exceed? So what happens if they say, I need it for 6 months, and then, you know, a year later, it's still sitting on their property?
Well, the special exception says 6 months, then it has to be brought to our attention, and then they would get a notice from us to remove it.
Okay,
Or come back for another special exception.
okay, all right, thank you.
Bruce?
Do we know how many special exceptions have been approved?
Not
Currently?
that many. Maybe a half a dozen so far?
Yeah, Laura, you might know better, maybe.
A little bit more than
Are there?
that. No more than 10 now. We have one next
And,
month.
and this has been in place for about a year and a half now. This ordinance has been in effect.
And is this like a big problem that we deal with routinely, is storage units, or? Are we trying to fix a problem that doesn't really exist, or? Because I kind of understand the questioning portion of it, but as I read the ordinance right now, it pretty much leaves the determination up to the ZBA. They have all the power as it relates to this right now. So, to me, adding in additional questions doesn't necessarily make it any cleaner or clearer. It just puts a time frame on it that we won't.
Well, it doesn't necessarily put a time frame on it. All it does is brings it to the ZBA's attention that they can ask this question. Because they haven't been, and afterwards they were saying, gee, you know, we're giving these people these special exceptions and there's no limit. It's like, but you guys have that power, but they don't realize it. By putting this on there, they will realize it. And I was hired by the town 4 years ago as code enforcement. And one of the first complaints I got was from a neighbor about his neighbor's storage container. At the end of his driveway, it had become a de facto garage for him. It had been there for years. And so I had a complaint, I had to follow it up. So I sent him the letter, and he was furious. But he got rid of it, he removed it, and then I started seeing him all over town, and it's like, well, I can't send one person a letter and not the other. So as I saw them, I started sending out letters that you had to either come and get a permit, and permits then were for 6 months, and they could be renewed for another 6 months, and then you had to get rid of them. And that's when people started getting all worked up over it. So it was about 4 years ago when they made the mistake of hiring me.
And as it stands right now, there's constraints within the ordinance as to where it can go, how big it can be, how many there are.
Yeah, you're allowed one. It has to be beside or behind the house. It has to be 15 feet off the property line. It can't be within 5 feet of the house. But, I mean, even in them, I'll see them in the front, or with, beyond the plane of the front of the house.
Yeah.
You know, they're not always put where they belong.
What teeth does the building health and zoning enforcement have as it relates to them? Do you send them a nasty letter, and then if they don't do anything, send them another letter that says
Yeah.
they're gonna get another letter?
Yep, telling them that they're gonna, in the end, if they don't comply, then we'll start to fine them. And usually they'll comply. I mean, for a while, I had them dumping the containers right on the side of the road, right in front of the houses and out by the road.
Yeah.
So it's a lot better than it was.
If a portable structure becomes a permanent part of the property, does the town then have the ability to tax or assess that?
That's a good
Structure.
question.
No, I believe that in the last discussion, the assessing department was clear that, that even if it's there for 100 years, it's not a structure that's permanent property that's assessed as part of the real value of the parcel, so. And just to your comment or your question about the enforcement, and send a letter and then another letter. Generally, the mentality on all enforcement issues in the town is that we're trying to work to achieve compliance. So you send a letter notifying someone of the concern, contact Nick's department to, you know, how can we rectify this? Usually people are very good at wanting to, you know, they understand. If people don't comply, then any violation like this is by statute. You know, there are timeframes on compliance, and then is it $275 a day is the fine for a violation.
That's for the
So,
first day.
yeah,
and
so-
$5.50 after.
So there are monetary penalties, and that, you know, in instances where the town can't get people to come into compliance, you know, we go through the courts and have to follow that. It's generally the sentiment of the town not to want to have to do that. We want to work with residents and with property owners to bring them into compliance. But it does have teeth.
Is there an avenue to pursue financially penalizing somebody from having a portable structure on their property that's not fines? So say you have a special exception, and after a certain period of time, you get assessed on that part of your property.
I don't believe that we have the statutory authority to do that. We can only assess violations in accordance with the statute, so I don't think that we can go back and assess something as real property.
I mean, I'd be okay with adding the questions, but, you know, I think that the authority really just lies with the ZBA in making the determinations on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. That's because there's a lot of variability with this anyway, what people want it for.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you live in if you live in a neighborhood and you have a commercial, you know, operation that's next to you, that's gonna be treated, in my opinion, by the ZBA, should be treated differently than somebody who lives in a, you know, 2.5-story wood frame, you know, development that has nothing but houses, you know. It depends on the aesthetics of the neighborhood.
Yes, yeah. Most of the problems that arise are with residential properties. I've heard very few with commercial and probably even less with industrial. Okay, Roger?
I've thought about this a lot from the last time we talked about it, and we came to the conclusion then that you could not tax that as property or assess it. However, I did find that you could probably license them for a period of time and charge for that licensing. And by doing that, you will know exactly when and where they are when they expire. I don't know if only 10 or 12 of them are in the town, whether it would be worth doing that. But it would be worth looking into if you need a way to establish a time element and when that time element has expired. And you license them, and then it's like if you rent a car, you have to pay taxes here, even though you're not rented out. If you lease a car, when you register it, you pay a tax on it here, even though it's not yours. So if they were leasing a property for somewhere, you could still license them to have that on a specific piece of property for a specific time. I'm not sure it's worth going through all that effort, but that isn't, and I like to have money coming into the town. So that's my opinion.
Is that a possibility? Something like, you know, you gotta license your dog and register your dog, you gotta register your portable storage unit?
So you could, so the special exception in a way is your license, but the application fee is, you know, the $60 application fee and your abutter notification, but that's your license. We chose for it to be a special exception, so that way it's a public process, so abutters would be aware that this application has come in, somebody wants to do this. If you have a concern, you know, raise it. Previously, when you could have a portable storage structure for 6 months by permit by the building department, and then you could extend it another 6 months, it was a permit by the building department. If we were to go back to sort of licensing and permit structure like that, I mean, you could say, okay, the permit fee for a portable storage structure is gonna be $500, and, you know, but the thing is then what's the right value to place on the permit application? And then is that taking it now back out of the public process? And now it's an administrative function where it doesn't give the abutters the opportunity to voice their concern. So it is something, I mean, I don't know how much revenue we'd really be generating. I don't know this is gonna be a big, you know, fundraiser for the town if we start, you know, trying to put additional revenues on portable storage.
How much of an offset are we trying to make up for at the power plant?
I don't think we're gonna get
That's a lot of storage structures.
You know, these things, we mentioned $1,000 if you can buy one, but I've looked to buy one. The least expensive I've ever found is $3,500. And a new one goes between $8,000 and $12,000. So if somebody's bringing that on their property, they're making, I don't know what it is to rent them, but they're pretty expensive. And if I were to build a 20 by 10 facility, you know, wooden facility on my property, a garage or whatever, I'm sure that would be assessed at quite sometimes, same amount of money. So I would be very, I would look forward, if we had 10 of them, it's not worth doing anything, except what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But if we have 20 or 30 or 100 of them in town, then you start talking about, we should make some money on it.
Yeah, we have another whole department doing the licensing for them.
Yes, and I volunteer to start it as long as you pay me once it gets going.
If it's licensed,
Budget.
does that mean that the building department would go out and assert the measurements as to where it's located on the property and all that?
I've had to do that with a couple of them, not that they were licensed, but when they got the special exception, I was asked to go out to make sure that they met the setbacks, so I had to do that. And just for clarification, because there may have been 10 special exceptions given for these containers, that doesn't mean there's only 10 in town.
Oh, no, there's probably hundreds.
They're all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
And even when we required that they come in for a permit, the permit was nothing but a list, that we didn't charge them anything. And they got 6 months, and they could request another 6 months. And occasionally, we would have to, with all the other things we're doing, we'd have to take that list and start going around and seeing where they are, because people just, they get their permit, they put them on, and they're there 2 years later, 3 years later, and they just never come back. So there are a lot of them out there that don't have the
Yeah.
approvals.
It's New Hampshire. Figure it
Yeah,
out.
live free or die.
Yeah, it's usually when you upset a neighbor, then, oh.
Well,
something-
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? I mean, nobody really cares until somebody complains, and then we care.
Yeah.
But,
Right.
no, until that point,
Oh, in the old days of code enforcement, nothing happened until you had a complaint.
Yeah.
Early days of selectmen, you know, there was, you'd chase a few down. We only had one building inspector, so.
Dick Hodgman?
Most of them, it was very, very hard, you know, what we needed, it wasn't until a few years after that we finally got a full-time code enforcement officer.
So-
Just dedicated to that. And then we had a lot of complaints because they had found out. The code enforcement officer was doing, you know, their duties.
Yeah.
if we wanted to put in a licensing process, would that go into the ordinance?
I think that the ordinance would then state that in addition to a special exception, you know, a building permit shall be obtained from the building department, and then it goes through Nick and his, I think the town council is the one who has to authorize a permit process or a building permit and fee like that. So we could write it into the ordinance that it's not only the special exception, but also subject to a container permit from the building department. And then it would be to Nick and the town council to determine what exactly that process is and how much it should cost and what that fee and licensing would be.
And it would be something you could enforce on previously existing structures if you got a complaint?
I don't know about previously contested. You'd have to ask the town attorney about that.
If they were already lawfully approved or were there and were legally
No,
pre-existing,
I'm
if
talking about ones that are out there that
somebody has it
we
out
don't know
there.
anything
and-
about.
No, because if they don't already have an approval, if they're not already lawfully, legally pre-existing, non-conforming, then we can enforce on it no matter what.
I mean, that's kind of the direction I would be more inclined to go, you know. Rather than assign a time to it, just make them pay money on it and it'll work itself out naturally. Because the people who truly want it will pay the money. And the people who don't, who are just have it there for convenience, aren't gonna pay the money and they're just gonna have it removed once you notify them, hey, you gotta, you know, a complaint has come forward, you can't have this in your property. You can either apply for special exception and then pay your annual fee or have it removed.
And this, I'm not asking you with this amendment to set a time. It's just to make the ZBA aware that it's a condition that they can set.
Yep.
They do
No,
have the power to do that.
I get,
We're
I
trying
get
to,
that.
you know, probably at this point, maybe the best thing is take a step at a time with it.
Right.
And I think we get into, try to convince the town council to pass it. I think there'll be a fair amount of flack. We've been there before, so.
I think if the board's comfortable, I guess what I'd look for some direction on if you're okay with us moving forward with this the way it is, if you want us to put in there some sort of a time restriction of 24 months, and see what the public has to say about that. And also, I guess, kind of to-do lists and items that I'd maybe leave out for right now, sort of an annual fee or an annual kind of licensing renewal or something on these things, but sort of do some research on that and figure out how to bring that maybe back separately. So if we can move forward with something now that gives the ZBA a little bit of guidance on how they're administering these things, and then we can look into the other issues. But sort of consensus on if you want us to try and put in language on a time frame. I think we're going to get public pushback from at least a couple of individuals who were involved in the last go-around, but we can include that if that's what the board would like us to.
Because we
look at.
might not get, I think we'll hear some from our own public hearings on it, but when it gets to the town council, that's where the pushback comes.
Yeah.
But are we, like, are we making regulations based on, or requirements based on a couple people in town complaining and everybody else, like, I get that I'm not the one that would have to face the fury, so I get that, but, you know, like, if there's 5 people that are vehement about it, but everybody else is,
Yeah, we've had
Okay
them where
with it,
there's
is
been
that-
both sides going back and forth, so you really have to hear them out, and then they are there also for the town council meetings.
Mr. Chair, to that point, people in New Hampshire have a feeling that it's their yard, their house, they can do what they want. And if it's done nicely, what's the big deal? Nobody's complaining. You know what I mean? So it really does come down to that individual. I mean, are we gonna start saying, you know, hey, your grass has to be cut, 3 inches, and you have to paint your house this, you know what I mean? Like, that's the slippery slope.
I grew up in New Hampshire.
I'm just
well
saying,
aware
that's
of
the thing that's the pushback. It's not necessarily, hey, if I want to work on this car and I keep all the engine parts in here and it's not leaking out all over the ground, and my neighbor doesn't care because I got 5 acres and it's way in the back in the woods and you can't see it, but I'm creating this monster truck or whatever. I mean, so that's why I think that letting the ZBA have the flexibility case by case, I just think that we got to be careful of taking away people's rights with their land and their home.
Yeah,
I think that's the pushback. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not even some people who even have containers. They just get very protective about people's rights.
I think the challenge, and you'll find, Jason, is that obviously you get, a couple of very vocal, individuals for any item that we discuss who may feel strongly or passionately, and the board needs to sort of weigh the public input they receive with, your planning judgment and what you think makes sense for the community. So it's, just that balance that's why you guys get paid the big bucks.
Roger.
So what you're actually asking us for now is
Yep.
whether we should have a space there for the zoning board to make a determination, if they want to, how long this can stay there. And I think we should consider that. I think we should do that. They don't have to put down 6 months or 10 years, but at least they have to make a determination that the person has a year, and if extenuating circumstances come up, they would address possibly extending it.
And that's how.
I think that's what you're looking
how this
for.
is currently written, is to address that we're just gonna raise it and let the ZBA know that they can put this restriction, and then the ZBA on a case-by-case basis, under this language, would, make a determination. If members of the board want us to make some stronger worded language that says that it shall be for 24 months unless otherwise, determined by the board, we can add that before we post this for public hearing. I just look for consensus on either adding that or keeping it in the more general time frame. And then the other issues on licensing and permitting, we can look at in the future.
I think every situation's different.
Yep.
And I think what you've wrote here and is taking care of the situation. You have to go in there and you have to say it's for this period of time, and this is why. And then there's public input and there's a decision made. My recommendation, I like the way you did it, so.
Is the board, I'm looking for a consensus of the board, if we just go with what Nick has suggested to us, and see how it goes, and then, I think we'll have further discussions, I'm sure, on whether to put a time, see how it goes with the ZBA. And then, we'll, have further discussion if they have still, if the ZBA has concerns or problems. It's like taking a step at a time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I think this is a good logical first step. It gets the conversation going, provides enough guidance for the ZBA to, to address, address the timeline. And then then you have the opportunity to build upon from there. So I agree with just as it is.
Is the board comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus that they're acceptable. We can go to, at some point, a public hearing on that. I'd like to do a housekeeping thing. I'll appoint Roger to vote for Al, since he is absent, and Jason, I'll appoint Jason to vote for Jake, since Jake is absent. That gives us 8 voting members if we need it. I think the only thing we would probably do is voting on adjournment, so there's going to be a good consensus there, so. We aren't making any decisions other than getting a consensus and giving guidance to Colleen as we, we'll be getting, once we go through this, we might have another workshop on some things, and then we'll be going to a public hearing. Anything to do with the ordinances, the planning board makes a recommendation to the town council. The town council has 2 readings. First reading is they introduce it, the second reading is they have a public hearing. And then they vote to adopt it. Let's see, next we have is regarding commercial kennels. And this has been a hot topic in the past also. So we've had some people come in for conceptual discussion that have very good intent and probably perfectly good reason to supply a service for people in town. And we don't have the, zoning to permit it. And that's with kennels. And when we have had those discussions, we'll hear from people that don't want barking dogs or anything. So there's two clear sides to this. So we've been very careful, and that's why we haven't done anything. You have anything to say, or maybe you can make your presentation, Nick?
Okay, so I'll read this for you. This was actually submitted by Richard Canuel a few years back.
Yes, it goes back, oh my God, probably up to almost maybe 10 years.
Okay, please reconsider the below proposal regarding commercial kennels originally submitted on April 19th, 2012 by
Oh, yeah.
prior zoning administrator Richard Canuel. There are presently no provisions in our zoning ordinance addressing commercial kennels as a permitted use in any of the established zoning districts. The only reference to kennels is contained in section 2.3.1.4 pertaining to the lot size and setback provisions of the keeping of livestock. Also, the existing supporting definition of a kennel is very broad. Based on the broad definition and limited reference to kennels in the ordinance, it's been interpreted that the intent of the ordinance is to limit this use in the residential AR1 zone. However, as our ordinance is written and customarily applied, if a particular use is not listed or does not fit within any of the categories among those uses in the tables of uses, that use is considered not permitted. Therefore, any commercial kennel use would require a property owner to apply to the ZBA in request for a variance. Considering the variance criteria, the ZBA would be hard-pressed to grant such a waiver to the ordinance without having specific provisions in which to reference. On the other hand, it does not seem appropriate to limit a kennel's use to the residential zone where a considerable number of dogs on a property could create a nuisance by the increase in noise and odor, etc. Likewise, it seems unreasonable to restrict kennels from the commercial district as a permissible business use. Not allowing kennels as a commercial business use anywhere in Londonderry is overly restrictive. Under the current provisions of our ordinance, if I were to classify a commercial kennel as a use, it would more closely fit the definition of a service establishment. By comparison, the intensity of a kennel use is somewhat out of phase with those uses commonly identified as service establishments. I propose that the planning board consider an amendment to the ordinance which may help to clarify a distinction between kennels and other commercial uses that may be considered service establishments. Presently, service establishments are permitted in the following zones: C1, C2, MUC, Industrial 1, Industrial 2, PUD, AD, POD, 102, POD 28. A kennel as a service establishment may not be compatible with those other uses permitted in these zones, for example, next to a restaurant or assisted living facility. Understanding that it's preferable to locate these service-oriented business along well-traveled corridors, however, the very nature of a kennel operation may require a more controlling mechanism in the form of a conditional use permit. I recommend the following zoning ordinance amendments for the board's consideration. Amend section 2.2 table of uses in the business uses category. Insert kennel, commercial as allowed by conditional use permit in C2, the POD 102, and the POD 28. Amend section 2.6 overlay district subsection 2.6.1.6.3, uses permitted by conditional use permit. Insert new section 2.6.1.6.3.4, commercial kennels. Furthermore, considering the likelihood of a large kennel facility, it may not be unreasonable to allow such a use in the industrial 1 zone where the generation of noise and odors may not be objectionable. Amend section 2.2, table of uses in the business uses category. Insert kennel, commercial as a use allowed in industrial 1. Amend section 4.7, definitions. Insert new definition. Kennel, commercial. An establishment limited licensed to operate a facility housing dogs, cats, or other household pets, and/or grooming, breeding, boarding, or training of animals is conducted as a business. Thank you. Those words were by Richard Canuel.
Yes.
And the smart man. And I can see where he was going, where he wanted to have conditions where we could have commercial kennel. the town is growing, there are people who would like to be able to
There,
kennel
there
their
is
dogs.
a need for the service, you know, that's what we've found out as a board.
But they want to have control over where they would go. They don't want them near residential areas. And even some businesses might not be compatible. So if they do it this way, it'd be on a case-by-case basis where there would be control.
Yeah, Colleen?
No, I just point out, as Nick said, and so if any of you are kind of looking up the ordinance, this numbering
numbering's
was
off.
from the prior, before we did the zoning overhaul.
That's the
I mean,
old-
so the section references are off, but still the intent is the same, just in allowing these doggy daycare and dog grooming type uses by conditional use permit. The only other thing that I think would be of consideration for the board would be establishing what the criteria are for the conditional use permit to be granted. We do currently have general criteria for any conditional use permit, but are there criteria specific to the dog kennel use that would be appropriate? Number of dogs, if the use is inside versus outside, if we're talking grooming and dogs that are just there by appointment for a couple hours versus, doggy overnight camp where you've got dogs for days and outside and barking, we can get into all sorts of fun logistics of the dog care business, I guess. But it might be something that if it is by conditional use, if the board has certain criteria you want us to consider and try to do some additional research and draft some language for you, we can do that.
We have I know we got a veterinary clinic or two in town. Do they have any storage outside?
No, veterinary hospitals by definition in the town zoning are not considered kennels.
Okay, so everything is inside? If okay.
There is one right next to Long Blue Cat.
Yes.
Okay, what if any complaints from
But that's C2.
C2?
C2.
So it's, yeah, it would be illegal. But, yeah, so I'll go through the board. I'll start again with Deb.
I have a question. Does the state have, I don't know, like, do you have to be licensed to do this? Do they have conditions? I mean, to make sure that the place is sanitary, that the dogs aren't going to be outside in freezing cold weather, that they will be taken care of well, especially if it's a breeding kennel. I mean, I guess one of the things would be, will we be following the state's licensing for somebody to become a breeder or a kennel, or is there some sort of health codes with it? I just, every time I hear this, I think of the people in Derry. There is a woman who is a dog sled racer, and she has over 50 Malamute Huskies in the middle of a neighborhood, and one car goes by, and let me tell you, you've never heard yowling in your life like these dogs. It's I would not want to live there. But I mean, you do want to make sure that the dogs, that it's not going to be a bad conditions for them. You know what I mean? So I guess I want to make sure we apply the state's
I have no idea.
controls. They've got to
what-
have some
we-
controls
we
over
can-
that.
We can see, we can definitely look into that, yeah.
Well, RSA 437 in New Hampshire has application to license commercial kennel premises, which is put out by the State of New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food Division of Animal Industry.
You say 437?
Yeah, RSA 437.
So that should be referenced in there, that we want to follow those rules to make sure that the conditions for the animals are, and maybe we have to inspect them. I guess that would be you, would have to go out every now and then and make sure that they're complying to those,
I like dogs.
that the conditions, that the conditions are being upkept. I mean, you're talking about something that's living. It's not, you don't want to see it abused, any animal. You just don't want to see that.
And as far as the reference you have to the house in Derry with the 50 dogs, in the Londonderry zoning, our definition of a kennel is for any structure or lot housing 4 dogs over 6 months. So that would automatically be out. You can't do that in Londonderry.
So if you had 5 dogs and they
You're a
were
kennel.
yours?
You're a kennel. Yeah. If your dog has a litter, you better get rid of him after 6 months.
Nick hates puppies, is that what you're saying?
I love
Is that-
puppies.
Is that in the record?
Anybody know where I can get a laptop?
Good luck
But-
taking away somebody's fifth dog. That's your job.
They'll give you the storage unit first.
I was thinking of getting a storage unit to put the dog in.
Dogs in a storage unit,
We'll
now
have to
we're
have a
really in
kennel out
trouble.
back here or something, though.
And I guess
then just to
fostering
fill it
would
in,
be
we can throw some
accepted,
chickens in too.
because sometimes when you foster, you have more than one at a time, and you train them to
Two of each.
move on.
But in most instances, I mean, there are people that, I know there are people in town that had more dogs than that. And we're not out there looking, counting dogs.
Right, no, I know,
It's-
I know
it's-
someone who breeds, what are they called, Grand Pyrenees, and they, at any time, they have 5 to 8 dogs
Right.
on
So-
their property. Now, they're pretty quiet unless you pull up the driveway, then they're not so quiet, but,
So the only time that we on our radar is if somebody complains about their dogs next door. They've got a bunch of dogs and they're barking. You know, and that's the only time that we would really get
yeah,
involved.
and you don't need a bunch, really, you just need one.
Yeah. And
'Cause
then
I had a person that lived around the corner from me who had, what are those things called, bloodhound?
Oh.
Yow! All night, like the guy left him out all night. I'm glad he's moved, but it was horrible. I felt bad for the dog. So, yeah, that's my concern, is that we just follow those rules, making sure that their animals are taken care of.
Yeah.
And you're right, they should not be in any residential, maybe exclusively to industrial and
I think,
high
probably
commercial.
commercial too, to a certain size. And I
Yeah.
don't know what that size is, but beyond that, it's, a big kennel's gotta be an industrial one.
Yeah.
Preferably by the airport, so they can howl to their heart's delight at the planes.
And then you got the smell, you know, in the hot summer day. That's, go by Derry Dog Park on a good day.
Yeah.
It's not
And-
pleasant.
That's already covered under the under the animal ordinance that we have for noise and smell. If
Okay.
it becomes a
Yeah.
nuisance.
Yeah, it's a
But we can
public
deal with it.
nuisance.
Wow.
I grew up in a small town, very agricultural, and they had a animal inspection officer. Keep track of all that stuff. There's a lot of cows, and the horses came, so. Jeff?
When this was originally proposed in 2012, is there any history on why it didn't kind of get adopted then?
So I tried to review the minutes and it was sort of, it was discussed and then we like this idea, come back and we'll talk about it again. And then 6 months came back and sort of, okay, well, maybe this or maybe, and it seemed like it was sort of,
It just
kind
kinda
of
like
just kept getting
just
continued.
died
and
out.
Yeah,
Rich's plate was pretty full. I think through some of that era, we were
Got it,
pretty
okay.
busy, and it's one of those things, there's certain things that just end up at the bottom of the list, and they say, oh gee, how about this?
Got
And it was a discussion that was never finished.
All right, so there's no like strong history, kind of pros and cons, community members that might be
I don't
for or
think
against
We
this.
did have some input from people that had concern about barking dogs. You know, once they'd seen a conceptual discussion, and then, it would be the phone calls or email, that, we don't really want barking dogs in the neighborhood or anything. I think that's where if we, a sizable kennel, if we're gonna allow kennels, it's gotta be in a particular location. I don't know if we're quite at the, it's like taking a big step. I mean, it's, so that's why it never got developed.
All right, and forgive me, just to clarify, but 6 dogs would be a kennel.
4. Oh, 6 would, yes, anything over 4.
Oh, anything over 4 would be, considered kennel.
Oh, is it 4?
So I'm a,
4 dogs is considered a kennel.
um,
4 dogs over 6 months old.
and this might be completely, but if I don't have 4 dogs. I just have 1 dog.
We
I'll take Jeff's dog.
Right. So if I have 4 dogs and I'm, I obviously live in a residential area, like, what happens then? I'm considered a kennel, and if I'm hearing this and reading this correctly, this is only for non-residential yeah, areas, correct? Or if am I completely off base
Right,
on that?
right now, if you have 4 or more dogs over 6 months in any, in a residential or anybody, that's prohibited. So it may be that the board may want us to look at exempting, you know, your personal, you know, pets or, you know, and finding a way of, so that if you're a dog lover and you have 5 dogs, zoning really isn't intended to limit that type of, so it could be that that's a clarification if the board
I think that's important.
doesn't want Nick to have to go start stealing children's dogs from them. then
Yeah, I think that's
clarify.
important, what you just said, that really needs to be added,
Yeah.
because if it is just personal and you're not doing it to make a living,
Yeah,
then, yeah.
we can try to find a way to clarify
Yeah, I
that
think it's the
you know,
commercial
it-
aspect.
it doesn't open it up for a breeding,
Yeah.
you know, kennel to be in a residential district with, you know, 50 dogs, and someone saying, well, they're my personal dogs,
Yeah, that's a
we'll have
little
to do some
different.
research and see what other
Could
towns
you-
do.
Could you add something to it, like, you know, personal and for profit or something like that? Because I think that helps with that situation, because I don't want to be reaching into people's personal lives and starting to pull puppies away and what have you.
Yeah,
I don't-
maybe-
I don't think you want to do that either, do you?
Maybe it's if they're licensed. You know, if you know, if you've got 5 licensed dogs that you've paid licenses for, they're probably your dogs.
Because, I mean, they're part of the family. I'd look at it that way. But a commercial thing is something totally different.
Yeah.
Because even some people will have dogs and they breed them, right? And sometimes you can't sell all your puppies. And so you end up keeping them. I mean, you're not going to get rid of them, you keep them. And so sometimes you end up with more dogs, especially the little ones. You end up more than what you think you're going to have.
Isn't that a commercial venture if you're selling them?
I think it's the scale of it.
I think that's where,
That's
it's-
the-
Yeah.
that's gonna be the challenge, and so I think that what
I think
Nick and I can do is look
The
at.
licensing part is it.
Look,
I mean, if I'm just
yeah.
selling them, I'm not going to license them. The only
don't-
ones I would
no, I'm
license are the
just
ones
saying
I
under
keep.
your-
Licensing you.
but
Yeah,
There is
there are licensing requirements for breeders, and so we'll, I don't think we'll be able to solve it, but I think we can do some research and try to get some answers for the question.
at the crossroads, there's an animal hospital. And my cat stayed there overnight, so they must have a facility. And I wonder, I've never heard a noise coming out of there. Now, is that a possibility, like in a strip mall? And the second thing is the dairy place, the great big, they sell animals out of there, birds and puppies and stuff like that, so they must have a place to store
That
them.
woman.
And I've never, and I was there a lot, so I never heard anything. So those are commercial spaces, you know, for stores and stuff.
Yeah. Nick, how would a pet store or, I mean, was that a retail use, but if they have animals?
For sale.
Yeah. I don't know, I haven't, that
That-
question
that's-
hasn't come up to us before now.
But if they were in a commercial district, it would allow it with a conditional use permit, right?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having it with a commercial, needing a
Okay.
conditional use.
Yeah.
That you can put conditions on it, and on a case by case. You
I
can
don't
look
like
at
the
the
mall
location.
there's pet stores in there, so I don't know what they're.
Yeah, all I was referring to is we talk about a lot of noise, but, you know, a fairly big operation may have several animals overnight who could be dogs or whatever. In my case, it was a cat, didn't make too much noise, but, you know, noise and smell seems to be a big problem with animals on properties.
I think that a pet store or something that is typically going to be more of a retail use where there may be animals on site, but it's really a retail classification, And typically with a use like that, there's not an outdoor run, there's not, I mean, you've got crates and you've got kennels interior to the structure. So I would venture if somebody wanted to open a pet store in town, it would already be a permitted use as a retail use. But a good point for additional clarification, though.
Most pet stores have stopped selling animals. I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
except for like
Yeah,
lizards
just
and
because
frogs
it's
and
not
stuff.
Anything else, Jeff?
No, I'm good, Mr. Chair.
So I'm kind of curious, what's driving this discussion tonight? Just
We had
housekeeping?
some people approach us who were looking around town because they wanted to open a kennel. And as it is now, they can't. And so we felt it was reasonable that they should take another look at this.
Mhm.
And under the right conditions, maybe allow a kennel somewhere in town. And because it became aware that if you have a dog and you're gonna take a trip and you wanna put him in a kennel, you gotta go to Derry or go to Hooksett.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta bring him to the barking dog.
Well, I get that there's nothing in town right now. I just wasn't sure if somebody, like you had said, had come to the town asking about the possibility of opening up a business here. Is that's really what's reopened up the conversation?
Yes, we did have some people approach us.
Okay.
And we had to tell them, I'm sorry, but,
Yep.
you know, it's not legal anywhere in town because of the way our zoning ordinances are written.
Yeah, quite a while ago, I remember, I can recall, we had two consensual discussions on individuals that wanted to, you know, have a kennel, more or less for keeping dogs when people go away. And, you know, we had no provision to accommodate it, other than saying, we'll look into it, what we can do, you know, but, you know, sorry.
Yeah.
And that's usually the last we saw of them, and that's when Richard Canuel, I think, brought it up, and we had a discussion that kind of went on over a short period of time anyway, and then just nothing ever happened. It was,
Okay,
that's, you know, the only reason I can think of is that there's been probably, you know, individuals looking at if they can provide a service with dogs. There's a lot of dogs around now. I think more so I know the dog population in my neighborhood has gone up, and they're nice and friendly, and you know, you get to know them. They get to know you, so.
And nobody breaks into your house because they're.
so just
Yes,
to
Lynn.
carry on my thoughts just a little bit more, so I think I have one concern. I think, number one, if we decide to go down this path, and I don't think it's a bad thing to do, I think it's probably what we need to do. I think we'll do a good job bounding noise, bounding inside, you know, inside boarding versus outside boarding and noise and things like that. The only concern I have is with breeding, and just, I don't know if we can control breeding or not, and making sure we just don't allow any puppy mills into the town. That's the one thing that bothers me the most about going down the commercial kennel path. And I'd like to see the ordinance from the RSA, if you could capture that, Colleen, and send it out to us.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks.
4:37.
That's it.
I spent my time in the 670s, so. Johnny?
My thoughts on this is that I do think it is, should be allowed in the commercial uses, all the ones that you or Richard suggested here. I think that by having a restriction of a conditional use, you can further define where, so, you know, it's not out of control. I don't think we should reach into the private citizens' lives and tell them, you know, you can't have a dog, you can't have 5 dogs, you can't, you know, 3 is acceptable, 4 isn't, 5 isn't, you know.
Well, not to interrupt, but as it is right now, it's just because of the definition of what a kennel is in the zoning ordinance, and you're not allowed to have a kennel in your neighborhood, so it's not allowed.
Yeah.
But we don't hear about it because unless somebody complains about the neighbor that has 15 dogs. And
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that until you brought it up, and I just,
Right.
I think that's a little, that was just, I'm just giving you my opinion, because
Yeah.
that's, I guess, what we're here for. So, and I like your thoughts, Colleen, where, maybe you can define if it's for profit in residential, then it becomes considered as, and I like your thoughts too, is whereas, I've seen some of these breeding facilities in neighborhoods that have literally 20 dogs in the backyard. So that's why maybe it could be, a profit component in it. And then I think you need to, maybe it already is, but I'm thinking kennel needs to be defined. Because, you have the vets and, some folks brought that up and saying, is because they have dogs sleeping overnight, and they may have more than a certain number. You have a lot of those training facilities now. You have emergency vet clinics popping up everywhere. So there's a lot of spin-off related enterprises that come up because, dog ownership, cat ownership is really popular these days. So what is a kennel? And it might be defined, and I'm just asking.
It is defined in our zoning ordinance as any lot or structure to housing 4 or more animals over 6 months of age. So that's a definition of a kennel. And then if you go into animal hospital, it specifically says that an animal hospital is not considered a kennel. That's by our zoning ordinance.
So I think the approach that, that Nick and Richard were recommending here is changing that definition of kennel to make it clear that it's, a business operation licensed for grooming, boarding, et cetera. So I think it would be to more clearly define that. And I think that what it will need to do is have us also trace back through, our medical office definition, because I believe our medical office definition, says that, veterinary clinics are, considered a medical office. And I guess it's going to spiral into making sure that there are additional definitions, and it's going to be more than just the recommendations that are in this memo. I think we'll end up kind of having to trace through the ordinance and see.
Yeah.
the
But
other
Colleen,
areas.
even what you just said is like if they groom but don't board, is that a kennel?
Yes, if they groom but don't board their kennel, under what this proposed definition is. So if they do grooming, breeding, boarding, training, those are all considered a kennel. And kennel might not be the right word. It could be that we need to look at some other towns and see how they're defining, these uses. So, and it could be that we're defining, creating a couple of new definitions. But I think for the discussion purposes tonight, this is very helpful for us to understand sort of what parameters the board is comfortable with, and if these type of service uses are going to be permitted, do we want the conditional use criteria to also include, setbacks from a residential district? So you're allowed in C2, but not if you're within, X number of feet of a residential district, or you can if you're within a close to a residential district, but perhaps there's no outdoor dog runs if you are, in certain. So I think some input like this will let us draft some language and some restrictions to come back with you on what those conditions might be in the CUP.
Yeah, because I think that would be wrong if we were to say, okay, they're a grooming facility, but the dogs come in for an hour and then leave, or like the training facilities that are popping up, their dogs are coming in for half an hour and then they're learning lessons or what have you.
I think it would be reasonable for this board to apply different restrictions to overnight boarding, to outdoor dog runs, to that sort of thing, versus if it's strictly grooming and it's more like a hair salon, except your dog's walking in, they're being groomed, they're walking out, and there's not a long-term.
It's a home, like a home occupation is like one at a time or something, and that's not a kennel.
Yeah, and
think
then when I say that, the things I'm thinking of, at least in my thought process, are actually in commercial zones, so.
Yep.
Yeah, then you'd have to get an in-home. Well, anyhow, yeah, I think it's advisable to look into that a little bit.
I'll get to you after, Jeff.
That's what I got.
How's that? Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the definition that's in front of us here, it reads, an establishment licensed to operate a facility housing dogs, cats, or other household pets. I'm almost of the opinion that we might want to strike other household pets, because I can't think of anything that is not a dog or cat other than like a hamster, gerbil,
Rabbit,
And I just don't want to go down that type of road.
Turtle.
turtle, yeah,
Um,
birds.
So I'm not, I mean, it's probably a little nitpicking, but
Yeah.
it might be prudent to kind of take that household pets verbiage out.
Yes, because there's a,
You're saying not that, an animal hospital can't, or?
No, I'm just,
I think-
just saying like housing dogs and
mongoose, if that's
cats.
what you
I
have.
think he's saying he doesn't want to get into regulating like pet sitting for a fish or something, like.
Right,
you know,
like,
so-
kind of like vanity pets. I don't know if you call a hamster a vanity pet or, but like fish or hamsters or gerbils, birds, really kind of just looking at, maybe dogs or cats. And, maybe I'm, not thinking, broad enough here. Maybe, maybe we keep household pets in there. I'm just thinking, if we, I don't want to go down the road of regulating hamsters or gerbils, just regular household pets.
like
And I'm just
like
trying to
like a
figure
normal
out,
household pet.
I'm just trying to figure out what is that household pet that we want to regulate.
Well, a pig is a perfect example.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, a ferret
Oh,
could be a household
We
pet.
have pigs for
Or a
pets.
pig, actually.
Yeah, exactly, yeah,
So,
so.
okay. All right, I just wanted to kind of, kind of speak that out to see if
We don't want to be, we don't want to regulate something that doesn't require regulation.
Right.
We're trying to be
Yeah.
reasonable here.
We can regulate ourselves into oblivion. Yeah. Jason?
One thing that I think might help with the, it was brought up earlier, but help with the, pets versus boarding is, if we said something like more than 4 unlicensed dogs, I realize you don't have to license a cat, but, like, something like that, that would, like we had said earlier, if you're paying to license, paying the town every year for your dog, it's your dog, like, and so that may be one way around not regulating people's pets. So how did the planes stay right next to the long blue cat and honey dog? Like, if these aren't allowed in town, how did they, and I think it's good that they're there, I'm not complaining, but how did they get in?
By
Oh.
a stretch.
I think that they're not outdoor kennels, right?
No,
Like
they are, if you're ever at Long Blue Cat, they're out back.
Well,
yeah.
I think they were supposed to be indoor.
Oh, okay.
And then honey dog is just a.
Honey dog's
grooming.
just a groom, yeah, but you had mentioned that grooming is kind of falls into the kennel, so. And I use honey dog, so I'm not complaining about them at all, but like, I didn't know how they, like, was there a way for them to get in if that type of business isn't allowed in town?
Richard considered them to be a service establishment. It was a stretch. So we'd like to make sure that that doesn't happen again, that it is regulated, and we're not trying to stretch and put a square peg in a round hole. So we'd like to have it so that there is control in the town. They have to come for a conditional use, and that they can legally be there and it can be regulated.
And I do like the idea of some kind of even if it's in a commercial zone, not having it right, and I say this selfishly because my house is pretty close to a commercial zone. So like, having it where even if it is a commercial zone, it's still gonna be X distance from the nearest house or something like
Yeah, I
that.
think there's got to be discretion there
Yeah.
on behalf of the board.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. That's all I've got, thank you.
Bruce?
I'm in favor of the conditional use, but I think we need to better define kennel. In the zoning ordinance, it's just too loose in my opinion, and 4 dogs is, I have 3, and I can imagine having 4 or 5, it's not that far of a stretch, so I think that, for an individual to have personal pets is reasonable. So I think we just need to clean up that definition. But the conditional use, I'm in favor of.
Roger?
When I mentioned about the animal hospitals or that I've been into, I was more stressing the part that these are all interior-held animals as opposed to those that are running outside. So therefore, barking and smell is probably not a big thing. So I would think that I would like to see a distinction between something that is completely inside or a kennel that has outside runs. Is that going to be difficult to do?
I don't think so. We can,
Okay, but
Nick
you
and I are
see-
going to learn a lot about dog kennels and licensing and grooming and come back to you with some creative language.
Okay, I just, but I do think that's a legitimate distinction.
Yeah, I definitely think there is between an exterior and interior operation. There's
Yes.
definitely a big change.
Yeah, if it's in a, let's say, C2, it's gotta be all enclosed or something, or even in some industrial properties, where it's located, it's gotta be inside. If you got a lot of space, you got 50 acres for the nearest neighbor, you could have an outdoor kennel or something. But, so, something like that, I think the town's gotta have control, so there's some degree of control anyway. There's some order.
Okay. That's some very helpful direction for that. I think Nick and I can kind of work on some additional language and
Yeah,
come back with.
this is a work in progress.
Yeah,
so,
this one will definitely, be some additional time and input before we're ready to go anywhere near a public hearing for this. So we'll come back with another round, another rendition.
Yep. Thank you, Nick.
All right, thank you.
You're educating us also.
I'm getting educated too.
Okay, next, we have chickens. And I think there's some similarities here with the smells, the noise, and everything else. And it's been a long time that we've had, to have any livestock or anything, it has to be 2 acres. That
Yep.
goes way, way back, before my time even, so it's.
So at the request of the board, and we've received inquiries from, residents in town and other general is, right now, the existing ordinance restricts the keeping of agricultural livestock, including poultry and horses, need to be on lots containing 2 acres or more. With more folks wanting to have their own chickens, it was sort of a prompt to look at what's reasonable and what makes sense. So we came up with sort of a distinction between livestock, meaning horses, cattle, sheep, swine, versus poultry. And with the way that we've drafted this language, agricultural livestock would still require 2 acres or more. That's something that could be additional discussion in the future, but I think right now our focus was that chickens are what people are asking about. So we're not going to change things on horses and whatever other agricultural uses. We'll leave that at 2 acres. But for chickens, I got to create a definition for poultry, which, the American Planning Association helpfully has, some of these definitions of winged and feathered animals, including but not limited to chickens, hens, roosters, ducks, geese, and turkeys. So would permit poultry raising where we would allow it on lots in the AR1 district, no smaller than 1 acre in size. We're reducing that minimum lot acreage from 2 acres to 1. We can discuss if we want to reduce that further or what the board thinks is appropriate. Another restriction that there be no roosters permitted. Adding a general requirement that all agricultural operations should be conducted in accordance with the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture's Manual of Best Management Practices. That manual includes a lot of references to manure management, so things like, chicken litter and how things should be kept clean and maintained. So by including that general language in there, in addition to the language we already have about sight, smell, sound, nuisance, it gives some enforcement authority to Nick so that if there are folks that have an agricultural operation, that there is some impact on neighbors because of, and not just, in New Hampshire, we want to be very clear that we are protecting folks' rights to farm and to agriculture. So because you move in next to a horse farm, if you smell horses, we're not going to go out and there's not going to be a zoning violation because you smell horses. But if you are running a horse farm and you are dumping horse manure into a wetland buffer or into a stream, those are the types of things that are outlined, you know, sort of manure management, that sort of thing, in order to protect health and safety. So that's the type of thing we would enforce on, you know, agricultural smells versus, you know, what's something that's an actual nuisance. It's sort of a fine line that we walk, but I think that what we're trying to do here is allow people to have chickens on some smaller lots or on a standard residential lot in Londonderry being 1 acre, and put some language in here that gives us a little bit of enforcement authority to make sure that the chickens are not, you know, being a problem. Things for the board to consider, if you'd like us to limit the number of chickens. We haven't, you know, come up, I don't know what's the right number of chickens and the wrong number of chickens. Or if you want there to be a requirement that they be contained to a coop versus, you know, not allowing free range poultry. You know, those are items for discussion, but wanted to bring this to the board since it seems like it's been a popular topic, and get some input and see what direction you'd like us to go.
I think one of the things is to make sure it's non-commercial after our discussion about
Okay.
kennels. So someone can't have a broiler factory on their 1 acre lot.
So that one's gonna be a little bit more difficult for us to define, because if someone has 6 chickens, they laid a lot of eggs that week, and they're gonna sell the chickens to their neighbor for $3 a dozen, are we gonna restrict that? Are we going to, so,
That's probably not really, I wouldn't consider
Yeah.
it commercial.
yeah,
Because the amount of money you're gonna make is really minuscule.
yeah, okay.
It really is. I mean, when you take into consideration all the money you're gonna spend on feed.
We'll figure out a way of
usually
defining
a losing
non-commercial that
proposition.
still is
Yeah.
clear that, you know, incidental, you know, profit from this type of business is, it's not a business.
As long as you don't have 5 cars out front waiting to buy eggs or something like that. Okay, I'll start with Deb again.
Okay, well, I do have 2 acres, so I have 14 chickens. And I have them in a coop, and I free range them when I'm out because I don't want hawks to get them. But I like this. I think it's good. For the most part, chickens don't make a lot of noise. They don't like cement, so they tendency not to go towards the road. So they don't even like walking on the driveway. They will, but they don't really like it. I think it should be two-tiered. So if you have an acre, I can see, you know, having the chickens, and I do agree, no roosters. No. But you could have a half acre, and it could only be chickens, so no ducks or turkeys, because they take up more space. Because ducks, you need to have a pond, and you need to have a fenced-in area for them, because they will go, and turkeys as well, but we got wild turkeys everywhere that run out in the middle of the road. There's nothing you can really do about it. But I do think, like, thinking about a two-tiered, so somebody with a half acre who wants to have, 5 chickens in a small coop, it shouldn't be a big deal. I mean, it really shouldn't. They don't make a lot of noise. Cleaning them is pretty easy. They do get rid of ticks, which is wonderful. They keep down mosquito counts. I don't know. That's my own opinion. I just know that constantly, I can't even tell you how many people talk about chickens, and it's all about sustainability. You know, people want to be able to grow their own gardens and produce their own eggs and, you know, have the chickens. I know some people who, when their chickens stop laying after 3 years, turn those chickens into dog food for their dogs. But it's the sustainability of it, you know, it's the being able to do that. I mean, that's the whole idea of living in the country, is being able to sustain yourself. I'm so for this, it's crazy, but I do think we should think about 2 options. only because, I mean, they even allow you to do it in the city, in Manchester. You can keep a chicken by itself on your back porch in a 3-decker house. So, I mean, my chicken, if I open up the car door, she'll jump in, sit there, wait to go for a ride. I mean, it depends on how much time you spend with her. No, I'm serious. She's
Jeff, there's your household pets.
well, yeah, see, now I'm a kennel. I don't know. I just think that they're interesting. If you've ever gotten to know chickens, you'd understand that they're really quite friendly. And coming from the city, I was afraid to even hold a baby chick. And as we got them and I got acclimated to them, I find them to be quite humorous.
Well, they get used to you, you know, it's just the familiarity and
Yeah.
the.
They'll follow you around and,
Well, both my grandparents had chickens, and an uncle had a little farm anyway. And they were always kind of neat. They come up to you, you know, almost like peck, but I think they try to pick up some odor, you know, I don't know how their olfactory sensation is, but they do, there's a relationship, you establish a relationship, so it's.
and they're easy
Pet
to
chick.
manage. They're not big like a goat or a pig or they're easy to maintain. I don't know. I'm just gonna go on the thing and saying that, you move to New Hampshire for a certain quality of life, and that's your. I would love to see everybody take their lawns and take a third of it and turn it into a garden, just for the pollinators and things that we need to become more sustainable. And even though we're agricultural, our biggest agriculture is trees. If this pandemic thing had been worse and the shipments had been worse, at least if we had more gardens, more chickens, we could take care of our own town. So,
Yep.
I know that sounds kind of crazy and tree huggy, but sorry.
But even Montreal, because my wife has a cousin and a family that live there. And there's different areas of the city where there's community gardens. There's actually, believe it or not, a lot of gardening that goes on in the city.
Yeah, they take care of all the homeless. They give all the food to the homeless. It feeds them, and it's just important, and it creates such a great sense of community. I don't know. So I'm sort of, like I said, passionate there. I just think it's important, but I do like this. I do think you should not have roosters. It probably should be limited to no more than 20. Like 20 would be the max on an acre, and I think 5 in a half acre. No roosters and no ducks in a half acre. But that's really.
I know there's very density requirements, because I looked up, there's some that look for 1 to 2 square feet for, a caged bird. And then for, ranging, they look at anywhere from 8 to 10 square feet per bird. So, but there's varying, that seems to be the common ranges. And the Canadian thing, actually, I was reading that seem to have done a lot of research on what chickens need. So,
Yeah.
something we'll probably have to look at to what we allow for density, like how many chickens per acre, before the neighbors complain. Okay.
It becomes the dog thing. Are they going to be responsible people taking care of these chickens, or are they going to be irresponsible?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You can have 6 dogs and be very responsible. They're not outside, they're not barking, they're very well maintained in your house. And you could have, 30 chickens and be very, responsible, or you can be irresponsible, letting them run through the neighborhood, do whatever, it comes down to the ownership, the person. It really does. And hopefully people will be responsible because they're taking care of a life. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. You're on, Jeff.
Yeah. To follow up on Deb's points, which I agree with a lot of it, I think it definitely, I would really like to see the regulation kind of go from 2 to 1 acre. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing it even being reduced even further to a half acre with some conditions there. I obviously we talked briefly about kind of maximum per an acre, so I think you might want to flush that out a little bit. I guess, I mean, other than that, it's, Deb's point, this is New Hampshire, I think, it definitely kind of, we want to promote, sustainability, and I think, this is, one of those regulations that, allows us to do that.
You have a chicken in every yard, you know?
Chicken in every yard. Dog kennel in every yard.
Okay, Lynn?
Number one, I agree with both Deb and Jeff that I think the ordinance is necessary. I don't have any problem going down under 1 acre if we come up with that. The thing I would like to see is a density calculation though as well. And we talk about roosters, so I certainly don't want to have a rooster next door to me, but if there's a 2 acre lot, the way the language is in what you gave us, it says no roosters, period.
Yep.
But I think if you have 2 acres or more, I don't see a problem with roosters. It's just when you get into the small dense areas, right, I don't think I would want to see roosters. And then just one quick comment, under the new paragraph B, you have horses struck out in the first line, but I think
Yep,
that
thank
might
you,
be
that
a
should not be. Yep.
typo. Okay. So I
Okay.
support going forward with this.
Okay, good. Jen?
All right, I'm gonna be very pragmatic about it. I think if you're gonna allow it underneath 1 acre, you should just allow it. Keep it simple. I don't know if you ever try to count chickens, but
Every night.
Nick, you should know.
Make sure they're still there.
It's,
And they're laying.
you either allow, I think you proposed some good language with the feathered, poultry related, I don't know, you said something earlier, Colleen, that kind of made sense. Or you keep it out, and you just keep it simple, that's my thought process on it. And I wouldn't want to see anything that restricts what we already have the ability to do at 2+ acres.
Okay.
So, I mean, if either keep my thought, keep it simple, allow it, or don't allow it, but keep it simple. And then if it's 2+, I don't, people already have rights to do things, and we all live on agricultural residential land, and, you don't want those restrictions that you put into 1 acre zoning start to fall over on those folks. They already have those freedoms, and it is live free or die, so.
Jason?
So despite having grown up in Litchfield, I don't know the first thing about raising chickens. So, I mean, for the most part, I'm fine with it. The only thing that, and I don't know how we would do this, is if there's some kind of language about kind of containment. And the reason why I say that is, I have a friend actually that a neighbor had chickens and they were just free range chickens. And they were all gone in about a month with coyotes. And now they've got coyotes in there. The chickens are gone and now the coyotes are looking for other things to eat. And so people are losing cats and small dogs and stuff. So if there's some kind of a way to prevent that, if you don't have to deal with a coyote now, you don't want to have to deal with it in a couple months, so.
But they'll even break in. I had one break through the chicken wire, and I had to let my dog out at night. It was, caught him, but, I mean, it's
Yeah,
Everybody loves
it's
chicken.
just,
it
Fox, there's raccoons,
I know.
there's
I
possums,
know, I'm just
there's
saying,
coyotes,
they-
there's
well, they
foxes.
taste like chicken, so,
but the pen doesn't necessarily keep the, I lost like 12 chickens, baby chicks, one year in a pen, because it broke through the thing, and it was kind of gross, but the coyotes will leave once the food source is gone.
Okay. Well, they're still working through the cats in that neighborhood, so.
Yeah, well, then they'll move on once the food source is gone. That's why,
That's it,
Get
thank
the
you.
shotgun out, that's it.
you ever notice how, like, some years you have tons of rabbits, and then, like, all of a sudden you have no coyotes and you have tons of rabbits, and then all of a sudden you've got the coyotes and there's no more rabbits. And then they're nomadic. They just follow the food path.
Yep. proposal. Who survives? Anything else, Jason?
Nope, I'm all set, thank
All
you.
set. Bruce?
I'm of the position of Jenny, which is that, you know, either allow it or don't. And then, like Lynn said, come up with some sort of a calculation factor.
Yeah,
For-
the density.
Yeah, density. But, you know, allow it and then just a density calculation. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
Roger.
I've had chickens, ducks, and rabbits all at the same time on the current acre land that I have. Don't have rabbits, especially if you have small kids, because they let my rabbits out, which was, my herd was down to 3. And they went down the street and ate every single flower in every house lot on our street in about 2-3 hours. So that's not a good thing to have in a residential
Yeah,
area.
they like the fresh shoots that start up in your garden in the spring.
Yes, so, but I really would like, as everybody who knows me, to have chickens again and turkeys. Turkeys turn protein into meat better than any other. And if you properly feed them, they taste really good. So that's my thing. I would, ducks are a pain, because the dogs come after ducks all the time for some reason or other. And I had to, so I would do turkeys, and I would love to have chickens. And the amount of chickens, if you got a small family, there was 4 of us, but during the summer, you get, out of 12 chickens, you get probably 10 or 11 eggs every day. But when it comes winter time and they're in the coop,
Yeah,
you don't get
it's
that many,
slowed
you
down.
get 5 or 6. So 12 is about a good number to have. And turkeys, maybe, you only grow them for about 4 to 5 months. And when you don't, I didn't raise anything by getting eggs. I bought chickens. They come in the mail, or you buy them at the local feed store. And the same with turkeys. So you get little turkeys or little chickens. And when they do that, they guarantee that you have no roosters in the chickens, so.
Yeah, it isn't foolproof, though.
No, it isn't, but, they taste good. You fatten them up in a room for a while, and then you eat them for lunch. So I'm very much for, 1 acre can very easily support and not cause any smell or anything of, as Deb said, maybe 20 or so. And I would be looking at 6
Yeah, usually how-
turkeys and 12 chickens.
Yeah, more chickens is the more work also, so.
I used a very ingenious thing that I see they use now. I built my chicken coop on wheels. So I
Okay.
would take up the fence, chase them all in, close the door, and move it. So that they ate everything that they saw in front of them and fertilized that land. So you throw a little grass seed on it and it grows great.
Grass is really green, huh?
Yes, it is. So obviously I'm for this, within reason.
Have you got,
Yep, I think that gives some good direction. We'll try to establish chicken density and
Poultry density.
poultry density.
density.
As
And come
defined.
back with,
dog density?
This whole meeting has gone afoul.
Oh, very,
discussions
Portable
like this
storage
are why
units.
I just love zoning, so
to house the ducks and the.
I see them selling those.
we're learning a lot tonight. So the last item for discussion, and I'll point out, general housekeeping revisions, we're gonna come back with, it's that doesn't need any discussion or warrant any, presentation, but we have a number of changes, that, table numbers, need to be updated, reference sections are off. So that'll be the list that'll come in, and we'll go straight to a public hearing with that. But that's what our general housekeeping revisions are. So the other last more significant item is the draft groundwater protection district. So as you know, this came from the state's model ordinance. We discussed this back over the summer, and then Pierce Rigrod from the Groundwater Protection Bureau gave a presentation discussing some various water protection standards town can opt to adopt. So we've taken this language right from the state's model ordinance. A couple of things that I would look for some input from the board. The model ordinance recommends, or it doesn't recommend, but that can either define a wellhead protection, the groundwater district applying to all wellhead protection areas for public water supply wells. And we did include a map just showing those areas. If you had in your packet, I'm not sure if, what I emailed to you is in color, what's printed today is probably black and white, but the yellow in the emailed version are the public water supply wellhead protection areas. I would recommend that at a minimum, if we adopt a groundwater protection district, it should apply to those wellhead protection areas. The other option then is to also apply it to the stratified drift aquifer. Those aquifers basically are, it's the underlying hydrogeology that is feeding our groundwater resources that ultimately become a drinking water protection. That's an additional step. I guess I'd look for some consideration from the board on if you'd want this district to apply just to the wellhead protection areas or also apply to the aquifer areas. This is an initial, review and discussion for you to see. Previously, when we looked at the groundwater ordinance, at the state's model ordinance, it was, in the state's format. This is adopting it to our town regulation, so we'll still do some additional review. Jose and I have discussed making sure that we reference the town's stormwater management ordinance, which is not right now incorporated in this, and making sure we get some input from the fire department, as there are some comments relating to SPCC, spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans, and some of those things in terms of containment and of petroleum and fuel products that are in the realm of what Brian Johnson is reviewing and permitting. So make sure that he's on board with this, but wanted to get some input from the board, see if you have any comments or concerns, and primarily that distinction between the wellhead protection areas or also including the aquifers, and get some direction if the board has any additional concerns.
Yeah, I had a question, Colleen. In the wellhead protection areas that you have for number 1, it refers defined under Article 3, Part 1. What is that?
Yep, that section just needs to be updated.
Okay.
That's a carryover from the state's model ordinance, so it would really be under the definitions of 4.6.8.3.
Okay,
The public water system,
I'm saying,
yep.
gee, that doesn't sound familiar to me.
yes,
for,
nope, that's
ordinance
just a
language.
carryover, so that section numbering will be updated once we decide what we're including.
Okay. And I'll start with Deb. This will be a work in progress also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think everything should be included. I truly do, because when you're talking about groundwater, when you pull from it, it pulls from all different areas. So you need to protect as many areas as you possibly can. A while back, we had a heated discussion, if you remember, at the council level, when I was talking, when we were having droughts, and the school said, well, we have our own pond. Well, that water from that pond gets sucked up. You're sucking it up to spray it and water your grass. Well, that water comes from somewhere. It's coming from other aquifers and little rivers underground. And so, yeah, it's pulling from everywhere. So as much area as we can protect is great. And I have been appointed by Governor Sununu to sit on the groundwater committee and also on the health initiative for PFOAs. And one of the things that they just passed is that all types, so not just PFOA is considered a contaminant. They're now taking into consideration fluorides, magnesiums, arsenic, are all considered this. And so there's money out there to protect us. And they just raised the cap from $500 to $1,500. So if you're outside of St. Cobain and you have a contaminated well within the state's description of levels of contamination, you can apply for this, which will be done through the state, and vendors can apply for it for their customers.
Does the town assist residents for the
They'll
application of
be,
this?
they'll be going through the state. We as a town will have the form and direct them where to go, but it really be
an
headed by
application directly to
DES.
the state.
Yeah. And I was telling Colleen, this one woman, Amy, Ray, what's that woman, Amy's last name? Rousseau. She would love to come and talk to the planning board in regards to drinking water and how every developer who comes to our town tests the drinking water. Now, those results don't necessarily filter down to us. They're on a website, and we can get them and maybe even have a link to them to see it, which would be really, I think, important for data for us, and also just for having her talk about how the underground aquifers and just different parts of water affect how we pull and stuff. I thought it would be a very educational topic, you know, for a meeting like this, why we're doing this. And she may have some other ideas for us as well. And they're willing to do that. They're very willing to, but there is a lot of stuff going on, and if we can start looking at projects that we have, there's funding out there for us to get some of these.
She could do it electronically, can't she? So she doesn't have to physically come here.
She didn't mind, or she didn't care. So she was good with either way. But there was a lot of information. I wish I could remember it all. Sorry, my brain isn't that big, but yeah, it was so interesting, the stuff that she was talking about. And I wish I could have remembered it all, but I couldn't. But she talks about, you know, surface waters and protecting them and things like that, because this is a huge issue, a huge issue. And tomorrow is the meeting for the health study and the amount of cancer rates in the town of Londonderry and connected to contaminated waters. And now they're taking arsenic, and even though we all say it's naturally occurring, there are also other ways of contaminating with arsenic. So the Eversource poles that they take down, that we just heard them, that the woodpeckers, they got to take it down for the woodpecker. Those poles are filled with Creo, and when it makes arsenic, and they put it into mulch, and they put it at the beds of the conservation area, which creates more arsenic in our water than is normally naturally occurring. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I think it's real important for us to know what it is.
Yeah, I think it would already be appropriate to have her either physically or electronically, you know, talk to the
Sure,
board
so.
probably at some
So I
point.
think, and I expect, and so I had this conversation with Jose and with Bob Kerry about this ordinance and this model ordinance, honestly, we're 15 years late in coming and adopting this, and this is really relating to bulk storage of petroleum, of you know, gasoline, other fuels, and so, and, you know, regulated hazardous things. I think that I expect that we'll see additional guidance coming down from the state, and
Yeah.
we may be adopting then additional ordinances in the future that relate to these new and emerging chemicals that previously were not even being regulated. So I think that that definitely will be good for additional discussion, and I think that in terms of, in some of the things the board has already talked about are, you know, in the subdivision and site plan regulations, should we be looking at requiring developers to do, you know, additional water testing at the planning board level prior to, because right now they submit those test results to the state
Go to the
before they
state.
can build. Do we want to be more restrictive and have that information be submitted prior to approval of a plan? I think they're all great points for discussion. I think that this ordinance right now here really is something that I think at least since 2005, and probably before then, this model ordinance has been out there from the state. And there are a number of communities that have adopted it, and I really think it's, you know,
No, I
something that
agree that we
Londonderry-
should. We need to
yeah.
just keep moving
Yeah.
forward,
Yep.
because we need to be, like you said,
Yeah.
we're behind the 8 ball. There are some really small towns that are doing some pretty fantastic things, and we need to catch up before all the money does dry up and we have to pay for it.
Yeah, because I mean, Londonderry is led in certain ways, but not all the ways. So it's,
Correct.
I think we gotta be mindful of our deficiencies and
yeah.
do what we can to catch up.
Yeah, so I'll keep you, whenever I get documents, I'll send them to you. But I just think if we can try to keep DES involved as much as possible, coming in every now and then, because it seems like it's a real moving target. It's just from meeting to meeting, and they're monthly, they're constantly coming up with all these new findings, and it's like, but we just figured this out, now it's like just a constant
Yeah.
thing, and it's,
There's a lot more activity, has occurred this year, especially at the state level with the DES, which
Yeah.
I'm impressed. I think some of it has been pushed by our town council and Kevin to get things done, so.
yeah, so I just think that anything we can do, so I'm all for updating everything as much and include everything, because
Yep.
it really is important. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thanks. Jeff?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not gonna be as detailed as Deb is, but my first reaction is we have to include everything. And I'm thinking that, even, and I see your note of a combination of the two, but even just, having them line by line specific, just for the clarity's sake.
Yep.
But yeah, that's really kind of, at this moment in time, my only feedback. I want to kind of absorb this a bit more.
Lynn?
Nope, I'd like to see a combination of the both as well.
Great.
I'm 100% behind what Jeff and Deb have said so far.
Johnny?
I don't really have much to say about it.
Jason?
I'd like to see both as well.
Bruce?
Absolutely has to include both.
Roger?
I think it should include both.
So, full power ahead.
That's easy. We'll continue to work on this
Yep.
and
This will be coming
review
back
with
for further
with
discussion.
engineering and with the fire department and adjust the maps so that we want to be careful in how we present the information, and there are, so obviously the wellhead protection areas and these things are publicly documented areas, but there are also certain just safety issues with publishing, sensitive information relating to water supply resources. So we will probably find a way to, ultimately, when the map is created that says what the areas are that are being protected, it's going to be, a little bit more generalized so that I highly doubt that some terrorist is reading the Londonderry zoning ordinance in order to plot some attack on a public water supply, but,
You never know.
You
never know.
we just want to protect some of that sensitive information. So we're going to try to balance that in the version of the map that you see that will finally see.
You don't need Timothy
security
Leary.
issues that,
So it's a different world we're in now, so we're just trying to be cognizant.
oh,
So,
yeah.
that's all that I have for this evening. I appreciate all the discussion and the very positive the input, and I think you've given us a lot to go forward and to work on and to come back with
Yeah,
hopefully some
certain
strong
things
language
we
on some
go
changes.
forward. I think with the hearing, there's definitely, work in progress. We'll be having, more discussions before we get to the public hearing stage.
And the only other point to bring up, because signage is the other item that's been discussed. So the RFP for the consultant, I believe I mentioned last week, has been out there. The deadline for submissions is this Friday, so we haven't, nobody submits anything until the last day, so hopefully we'll get a few submissions, and that will be another work product that'll, it's anticipated that'll be a time frame of, 6 months or so once we get rolling into that to dig into signage more in depth. More things to look forward to.
Okay, I just want to mention for the board, Colleen just sent out an email. This is a webinar dealing with middle-income housing. It is on the 25th of January, which is a Tuesday, noontime to 1:30 p.m. And if anyone's interested, there's a link or something where you can tune in, so.
Yeah, and typically those New Hampshire housing programs, they're free to register, and they do usually record those sessions, make them available after the fact. Obviously, as volunteers, you folks all have, obligations during the day. So If there is anyone who's interested, then we can, you know, make sure that we are able to access the video after the fact and make that available to you, as long as New Hampshire Housing is able to accommodate that.
Yeah, and then also the Department of Planning and Development has their third Tuesday noontime webinar, and I don't recall what it's about.
I believe it's about master planning.
Yes, master
And,
planning.
and the Office of Planning and Development did reiterate today in an email that all of their sessions, so Art's been sending, you know, for the past 6 months or more, they've been doing these Tuesday kind of brown bag lunch webinars. They are all recorded and are on the Office of
they're
Planning
on
and
the
Development's YouTube channel.
website.
So, I will forward that link. They have quite the library of presentations if anyone's interested in additional education and background.
More information than you want to really know. The information era, overload. Oh, well. Any other business come before the board? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Right, Roger, second by Bruce. All those in adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.